Hello, dear listening squirrels. I am so sorry. I just been sorry. Not reading to y'all. Chapter 5. Commander Haydock turned out to be a most genial host. He welcomed Mr. Meadows and Major Bletchley with enthusiasm and insisted on showing the former, in quotes, all over my little place. Smuggler's Rest had been originally a couple of Coast Guard's cottages standing on the cliff overlooking the sea. There was a small cove below, but the access to it was perilous, only to be attempted by adventurous boys. Then the cottages had been bought by a London businessman who had thrown them into one and attempted half-heartedly to make a garden. He had come down occasionally for short periods in summer. After that, the cottages had remained empty for some years, being let with a mediocre modicum of furniture to summer visitors. Then, some years ago, explained Haydock, it was sold to a man named Hahn, H-A-H-N. He was a German, and if you ask me, he was neither more or less than a spy. Tommy's ears quickened. That's interesting, he said, putting down the glass from which he'd been sipping sherry. Damned thorough fellas they are, said Haydock, getting ready even then for this show. At least that's my opinion. Look at the situation of this place. Perfect for signaling out to sea. Cove below where you could land a motorboat, completely isolated owing to the contour of the cliff. Oh yes, don't tell me that fellow Hahn wasn't a German agent. Major Bletchley said. Of course he was. What happened to him? Asked Tommy. Ah, said Haydock. Thereby hangs a tale. Hahn spent a lot of money on this place. He had a way cut down to the beach, for one thing. Concrete steps, expensive business. Oops. Then he had the whole house done over. Bathrooms, every expensive gadget you can imagine. And who did he set to do all this? Not a local man, no, a firm from London. So it was said, but a lot of the men who came down were foreigners. Some of them didn't speak a word of English. Don't you agree with me, Tommy, that sounds extremely fishy? A little odd, certainly, agreed Tommy. I was in the neighborhood myself at the time, living in a bungalow, and I got interested in what this fellow was up to. I used to hang about to watch the workmen. Now, I'll tell you this, they didn't like it. They didn't like it at all. Once or twice they were quite threatening about it. Why should they be if everything was all square and above board? Bletchley nodded agreement. You ought to have gone to the authorities, he said. Just what I did do, my dear fellow. Made a positive nuisance of myself pestering the police. He poured himself out another drink. And what did I get for my pains? Polite inattention, blind and deaf. That's what we were. That's what we were in this country. Another war with Germany was out of the question. It's out of the question. There was peace in Europe. Our relations with Germany were excellent. Natural sympathy between us nowadays. I was regarded as an old fossil, a war maniac, a die-hard old sailor. What was the good of pointing out to people that the Germans were building the finest air force in Europe and not just to fly around and have picnics? Major Bletchley said explosively. Nobody believed it, damned fools. Peace in our time, appeasement, all a lot of blah. Haydock said, his face redder than usual with suppressed anger. A warmonger, that's what they called me. The sort of chap, they said, who was an obstacle to peace. Peace. I knew what our Hun friends were at, and mind this, they prepare things a long time Beforehand, I was convinced that Mr. Hahn was up to no good. I didn't like his foreign workman. I didn't like the way he was spending money on this place. I kept on badgering away at people. Stout fellow, said Bletchley appreciatively. And finally, said the commander, I began to make an impression. We had a new chief constable down here, retired soldier, and he had the sense to listen to me. His fellows began to nose around. Sure enough, Hahn decamped. Just slipped out and disappeared one fine night. The police went over this place with a search warrant. In a safe which had been built in the dining room, they found a wireless transmitter and some pretty damaging documents. Also a big store place under the garage for petrol. Great tanks. I can't tell you I was cock-a-hoop over that. Fellows at the club used to rag me about my German spy complex. They dried up after that. Trouble with us in this country is that we're so absurdly unsuspicious. It's a crime. Fools. That's what we are. Fools. Why don't we intern all these refugees? Major Bletchley was well away. End of the story. I was bought to the plate. End of the story was I bought the place when it came into the market, continued the commander, not to be sidetracked from his pet story. Come and have a look round, Meadows. Thanks, I'd like to. Commander Haydock was as full of zest as a boy. As he did the honors of the establishment, he threw open the big safe in the dining room to show where the secret wireless had been found. Tommy was taken out to the garage and was shown where the big petrol tanks had lain concealed, and finally, after a superficial glance at the two excellent bathrooms, the special lighting, and the various kitchen gadgets, he was taken down the steep concreted path to the little cove beneath, whilst Commander Haydock told him all over again how extremely useful the whole layout would be to an enemy in wartime. He was taken into the cave which gave the place its name, and Haydock pointed out enthusiastically how it could have been used. Major Bletchley did not accompany the two men on their tour, but remained peacefully sipping his drink on the terrace. Tommy gathered that the commander's spy hunt with a successful issue was not good gentlemen's principal topic of conversation, and that his friends had heard it many times. In fact, Major Bletchley said as much when they were walking down to Sans Souci a little later. Good fellow, Haydock, he said, but he's not content to let a good thing alone. We've heard all about that business again and again, until we're sick of it. He's as proud of the whole bag of tricks up there as a cat of its kittens. The simile was not too far-fetched, and Tommy assented with a smile. The conversation then turning to Major Bletchley's own successful unmasking of a dishonest bearer in 1923. Tommy's attention was free to pursue its own inward line of thought punctuated by sympathetic not reallys. You don't say so? And what an extraordinary business was all Major Bletchley needed in the way of encouragement. More than ever now, Tommy felt that when the dying Farquhar had mentioned Sans Souci, he had been on the right track. Here in this out-of-the-world spot, preparations had been made a long time beforehand. The arrival of the German Hahn and his extensive installation showed clearly enough that this particular part of the coast had been selected for a rallying point. A focus of enemy activity. That particular game had been defeated by the unexpected activity of the suspicious Commander Haydock. Round one had gone to Britain, but supposing that Smuggler's Rest had been only the first output of a complicated scheme of attack. Smuggler's Rest, that is to say, had represented sea communications. Its beach, inaccessible save for the path down from above, would lend itself admirably to the plan, but it was only a part of the whole. Defeated on that part of the plan by Haydock, which had been the enemy response, might not he have fallen back upon the next best thing? That is to, I just read that, Sansuchi. Yeah, okay. The exposure of Han had come about 4 years ago. Tommy had an idea from which Sheila Perina had said that it was very soon after that. Sheila Perina had said that it was very soon after that Mrs. Perina had returned to England and bought Sansuchi, the next move in the game. It would seem, therefore, that Leehampton was definitely an enemy center, that there were already installations and affiliations in the neighborhood. His spirits rose. The depression engendered by the harmless and futile atmosphere of Sansuchi disappeared. Innocent as it seemed, that innocence was no more than skin deep. Skin deep. Behind that innocuous mask, things were going on. And the focus of it all, so far as Tommy could judge, was Mrs. Perina. The first thing to do was to know more about Mrs. Perina. To penetrate behind her apparently simple routine of running her boarding establishment, her correspondence, her acquaintances, her social or war-working activities, somewhere in all these must lie the essence of her real activities. If Mrs. Perina was the renowned woman agent M, then it was she who controlled the whole of the fifth column activities in this country. Her identity would be known to few, only to those at the top, but communications she must have with her chiefs of staff, and it was those communications that he and Tuppence had got to tap. At the right moment, as Tommy saw well enough, Smuggler's Rest could be seized and held by a few stalwarts operating from Sansuchi. That moment was not yet, but it might be very near. Once the German army was established in control of the channel ports in France and Belgium, they could concentrate on the invasion and subjugation of Britain. And things were certainly going very badly in France at the moment. Britain's navy was all-powerful on the sea, so the attack must come by air and by internal treachery. And if the threads of internal treachery were in Mrs. Perina's keeping, there was no time to lose. Major Bletchley's words chimed in with his thoughts. I saw, you know, that there was no time to lose. I got hold of Abdul, my good fellow Abdul. The story droned on. Tommy was thinking, why Leehampton? Any reason? It's out of the mainstream, bit of a backwater. Conservative, old-fashioned, all those points make it desirable. Is there anything else? There was a stretch of flat agricultural country behind it running inland, a lot of pasture suitable therefore for the landing of troop-carrying planes or of parachute troops. But that was true of many other places. There was also a big chemical works where, it might be noted, Karl von Dienem was employed. Karl von Dienem, how did he fit in? only too well. He was not, as Grant had pointed out, the real head, a cog only in the machine, liable to suspicion and interment at any moment, but in the meantime he might have accomplished what had been his task. He had mentioned to Tuppence that he was working on decontamination problems and on the immunizing of certain gases. There were probabilities there, probabilities unpleasant to contemplate. What did I say? Did I say probabilities? That's what it was supposed to be. Maybe I did. Carl, Tommy decided, and in parentheses a little reluctantly, was in it. A pity, because he rather liked the fella. Well, he was working for his country, taking his life in his hands. Tommy had respect for such an adversary. Down him by all means. A firing party was the end, but you knew that when you took on your job. It was the people who betrayed their own land from within that really roused a slow, vindictive passion in him. By God, he'd get them. And that's how I got them, the Major wound up his story triumphantly. Pretty smart bit of work, eh? Unblushingly, Tommy said, most ingenious thing I've heard in my life, Major. And that's all of part 1. And I think I'm going to stop there. I know it's not a whole lot, but my eyes get doing that crazy cataract thing they do. I'm just glad to know what's going on with my eyes. But it does drive me crazy. Well, I think I'm going to get back on this cake koozie, and I didn't tell y'all any more about it. I'll try to do that tomorrow. Tomorrow's live. It's going to be a little mesh koozie to put your koozie cozy, to put your cakes in so they don't fall apart and get all messed up. Love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Bye-bye.